Good morning. So this morning I read Joshua 21, which is all about the Levites getting the cities to live in, which is interesting because the chapter is actually longer than most of the other chapters where God gave the people of Israel, the other tribes, their land to live in. And the Levites were not supposed to get land, like their own, land. And yet this chapter is longer than the other chapters where they got their land. So it's almost like even though they weren't getting land, there's a lot of land being given to them. Now, it's not a dedicated land. It's not one space. It's kind of cities spread out. But and the cities, each of them had a city of refuge that we talked about in the previous chapter. So it was cities with a purpose. They were to serve. The Levites were to be a serving people, the priests. But all that aside, I want to look at the last few verses of this chapter because it says how God is faithful. It says, Thus the Lord gave to Israel all the land that he swore to give to their fathers, and they took possession of it, and they settled there. And the Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he had sworn to their fathers. Not one of all their enemies had withstood them, for the Lord had given all their enemies into their hands. Not one word of all the good promises that the Lord had promised to the house of Israel had failed. All came to pass. God's faithful. Even when the Israelites had been unfaithful because they didn't do what God told them to do in not driving out the people of the lands that they were to possess, God himself was faithful. Every step of obedience they took, God was faithful to give what he promised them. It's just not one word of all the good promises. Interesting. There were still people in those lands that they didn't drive out, but that wasn't God's fault. It's that they stopped taking those steps of obedience. God's got promises for us. He's got all kinds of promises for us. Promises to the whole world. Jesus didn't come to condemn the world, but to save it through him. John 3:17. But it's usually us that don't take those steps of obedience toward those promises. And in saying that, it sounds like it's God blesses us because of our works. That's not true. God blesses us because of his word. But sometimes we don't realize those promises until we take those steps of obedience. It's natural. It's a natural blessing, natural consequence, natural blessings. Same thing happens in life all the time, right? If we're offered a sum of money, we have to reach out our hand and take it. I read about a guy who actually had millions of dollars in the bank and in investments, but he lived on the streets. He knew that money was there. He knew that money was his, but he chose to live the way that he was living because he didn't want to accept it. He didn't want to accept that lifestyle. The same is true for anyone who refuses Jesus. The blessings are theirs. God's promised them gifts. But until we trust in Jesus, which, by the way, is not a work that we do. It's a work that God does in us. So we can't take credit for it. Until we trust in Jesus, those blessings aren't ours. I mean, they're ours. They're waiting for us. But we haven't realized those blessings. The people of Israel, God had given them everything that he had promised them. Everything. Every word was sure. And yet there were still blessings yet to come. Are we walking faithfully in such a way as to experience God's blessings? Now, I am not a name it and claim it kind of guy. And yet there's a lot of truth in saying that as we obey God, we experience the fullness of his blessings. We have to trust him. We have to trust him and walk with him. Because then we experience the fullness of his goodness and grace. God bless you. We'll see you again tomorrow.